The United States is full of folklore. Skinwalkers, the Jersey Devil, Mothman, the Bell Witch. You know those stories, but honestly, those aren't the ones that bother me the most. It's the smaller ones, the stories that stayed in little towns, the warnings grandparents passed down, the kind of stories people still remember, even when nobody really knows where they started. And the more folklore I've read from around the world, Europe, Asia, South America, right here in the States, the more I keep coming back to the same thought. America might have the scariest folklore of all, not because we've got bigger monsters. It's because our best legends take completely normal things. A knock at the door, a light moving across a hill, somebody standing beside an empty road, and suddenly make you look at those things differently. Tonight, I've got 5 stories that, to me, prove exactly what I mean. And when we get to number 1, I think you'll understand why. Or, hey, maybe you'll completely disagree. You can tell me when we're done. But first, are you ready? Lock your doors, put on your headphones, and pull your blanket tight, because after this video, you'll never see American folklore the same way again. Number 5. The Death Candle. Now, the death candle is interesting because it proves something about American folklore that I think people sometimes overlook. It doesn't need a monster. No claws, no creature hiding somewhere in the woods. All it needs is a light. That's it. And somehow, that was enough to scare generations of families across Appalachia. For more than a century, people in Kentucky, Tennessee, Virginia, and deeper mountain communities told stories about strange lights showing up on distant ridges after dark. And they weren't talking about campfires. They weren't lanterns. They weren't lights coming from somebody's house. According to the stories, this was something else. People described small flames moving through valleys and across mountainsides where there wasn't even a road, and where nobody should have been walking in the first place. Now, on its own, that probably doesn't sound all that frightening. I mean, mysterious lights show up in folklore all over the world. Ireland has ghost lights. Wales has the corpse candle. Japan has stories about supernatural lights appearing before tragedy. So what makes the death candle any different? Well, here's the part that got me. The death candle wasn't supposed to show you where death had already been. It was supposed to show you where death was going. And once you understand that, the whole story feels different. Picture this. You're standing on the porch of a house somewhere in rural Appalachia around 1900. There's no streetlight, no traffic, no glow from a city somewhere over the hills. It's just dark. And I mean really dark. Then, way off in the distance, you notice a pale light moving across a mountain ridge. It isn't flickering around like a fire. It isn't wandering. It looks like it's going somewhere, almost like it already knows where it needs to be. Now imagine that a few days later, you hear somebody living in that direction has died. Then another family tells you they saw the same kind of light. Then another. Different counties, different generations. The details change a little, sure, but the warning doesn't. The light appears, then somebody dies. And honestly, the strange light itself isn't even the part that bothers me most. People see strange lights all the time. What gets me is that so many mountain families attach the same meaning to them, and believed that meaning strongly enough to keep passing the warning down, generation after generation. And I'll tell you this, if I had to choose between hearing a banshee screaming somewhere across an Irish hillside, or standing on my porch, watching a silent light slowly make its way through the Appalachian Mountains towards somebody's house, I know which one I'd still be thinking about the next morning. A scream feels like a warning. The death candle feels like it already knows the address. And that's why I've got it at number 5. Not because it's the scariest legend in America. It's not. But it introduces an idea that gets a lot more uncomfortable the longer you think about it. What if something knows what's coming before anybody else does? And if that idea bothers you, number 4 takes it in a completely different direction. We're leaving Appalachia now and heading all the way across the country to the mountains of California, because people there have been telling stories for generations about something that doesn't attack you. It doesn't speak to you. It doesn't even come closer. It just stands there and watches. Number 4, the Dark Watchers. And this one bothers me for a very different reason. Because according to the stories, they're not looking for somebody. They're looking at somebody, you. For centuries, people traveling through the mountains of California have described seeing huge, dark figures standing on distant ridges. They don't move, they don't wave, they don't call out. They just stand there, watching. The oldest stories are said to go back to Spanish explorers who crossed the region long before California became part of the United States. They described tall, shadow-like figures showing up around sunrise or sunset, usually on remote mountain slopes. Then you start hearing similar stories from ranchers, hunters, hikers, even experienced outdoorsmen who knew those mountains better than most people ever would. And somehow, the same basic description kept coming back. Different people, different generations. A tall figure standing completely still in the distance, watching. Now, at first, you might think this sounds a lot like the shadow person stories you hear in other places. But here's where it gets stranger. Most creatures in folklore eventually do something. They come closer, they attack, they speak. The Dark Watchers don't. And I think that's exactly what makes them so hard to forget. Imagine you're hiking alone through the Santa Lucia Mountains. You've been walking for hours. You're nowhere near a town. No voices, no traffic, nobody around. Then you happen to look up, and there's a figure standing on a ridge hundreds of feet above you. It looks too tall, too dark, and it isn't moving at all. So you stop. It stays still. You keep looking at it. It keeps looking back. Then you blink, and it's gone. That's the part I can't shake. The silence. Slender Man became famous because of the internet. Shadow people became a big part of modern paranormal culture. But stories about the Dark Watchers came long before either one of those. People were talking about these figures back when crossing those mountains could take days. And unlike a lot of folklore creatures, the Watchers don't seem to want anything from you. They don't need your attention. They've already got it. And to me, that's worse than being chased. Because if something chases you, at least you understand the situation. You know what it's doing. But something that just stands there, something that watches you and never explains why, you don't know what it wants. You don't even know if it wants anything. Even the famous giants in Scandinavian folklore eventually reveal themselves somehow. The Dark Watchers never really do. They stay distant, silent, unexplained, and maybe that's exactly why those stories lasted, because nobody could answer the one question that matters. What were they watching? The mountain, the trail, or the person who just happened to notice them? That's why the Dark Watchers take number 4 for me. The death candle suggests something may already know your future. The Dark Watchers suggest something may already know you're there, but at least they stay far away. The next story doesn't give you that comfort, because according to generations of people who told it, this one can follow you home. Number 3 is the Duppy. And this is where the list starts getting uncomfortable in a different way. Because unlike the death candle, and unlike the Dark Watchers, a Duppy wasn't believed to stay in one place. According to generations of stories from Gullah-Geechee communities along the southeastern coast, a Duppy could follow you. And that changes everything. Most folklore gives you some kind of option. Don't go into the woods. Stay away from that road. Don't climb that mountain. Okay, you can do that. The Duppy takes that comfort away. Because according to the stories, going home doesn't necessarily mean you're safe. The word itself traces back through African traditions carried across the Atlantic by enslaved people who brought their beliefs with them. Over time, those beliefs mixed with local traditions along the coasts of South Carolina, Georgia, and parts of Florida. And what came out of that became deeply rooted in local folklore. Now, a Duppy wasn't usually described like some monster. It wasn't a creature crouched behind a tree waiting for you. And honestly, that's what makes it harder to picture. People described it more like a presence, something intelligent, something you might feel before you ever saw anything. And sometimes, you never saw anything at all. The stories changed from family to family, but certain details kept showing up. Footsteps in an empty room, movement where nobody should be. That feeling that somebody's standing close to you even though you know you're alone. A door opening. Something moving inside the house. A shadow crossing a room when there isn't anybody else there. And here's another strange part. The Duppy wasn't always viewed as purely evil. And somehow, that almost makes it worse. Because if something's obviously evil, at least you understand what you're dealing with. The Duppy sits in this uncomfortable gray area. Some stories describe them as angry, others say they're restless. Some were believed to stay attached to a certain place, others to a person. And that's where this legend gets under my skin. The Dark Watchers stay up on the ridge. A Duppy might be standing behind you, and according to the stories, you might never even know it. I've read European folklore about spirits haunting castles. I've read stories from Asia about ghosts staying in abandoned places. But the Duppy feels different because the places in these stories are so ordinary. A bedroom, a hallway, a porch, a kitchen late at night. The places where you're supposed to feel safe. That's where these stories happen. And I think that's why people remembered them. They weren't afraid of something living miles away in the wilderness. They were afraid they might bring something back with them. Think about that. A monster in the woods? Stay out of the woods. A haunted mountain? Leave the mountain. But something that quietly follows you through your own front door? That's different. That's much harder to forget. And that's why the Duppy takes number 3. Because some of the scariest folklore isn't about something you can actually see. Sometimes it's just that feeling that you aren't alone anymore, even though every room in the house looks empty. And the next legend takes away even that uncertainty. Because with the Duppy, you can still tell yourself maybe there isn't really anything there. Maybe it's just your mind. Number 2 doesn't give you that same comfort. According to the stories, by the time you realize what you're actually looking at, it's already too late. At number 2, Dear Woman. And of everything we've talked about so far, this is probably the one I'd trust the least if I ever came across it myself. Because the death candle doesn't ask you to follow it. The Dark Watchers stay far away. The Duppy may follow you. Dear Woman is different. According to the stories, she wants you to come closer. And that makes this legend dangerous in a completely different way. Versions of the Dear Woman story appear across multiple Native American traditions throughout the Plains, the Midwest, Oklahoma, Kansas, Missouri, Nebraska, and beyond. The details change from tribe to tribe, but one thing keeps showing up. She doesn't appear as somebody you should be afraid of. That's the whole point. She appears as somebody you want to follow, somebody beautiful, somebody familiar, somebody who seems completely out of place. Picture yourself driving or walking along a lonely road around dusk, or crossing open land where you don't expect to see anybody else. Then you notice a woman standing there alone, calm, confident, almost like she's been waiting for you. And at first, nothing looks wrong. That's what makes it work. Dear Woman isn't frightening because she looks like a monster. She's frightening because she doesn't. A lot of the stories describe her as charming, graceful, easy to trust. Then something catches your attention. Maybe it's the way she moves. Maybe the shadow looks wrong. Maybe you catch a glimpse beneath her dress. And that's when you realize she doesn't have human feet. She has hooves. And by the time you notice that, the story usually gets darker. What fascinates me is how different this feels from similar legends around the world. Europe has sirens and enchantresses. Japan has spirits that disguise themselves as beautiful women. But Dear Woman feels more personal. She's not waiting somewhere in another world. She's standing beside an ordinary road, a place you recognize, maybe a place you've driven past 100 times. And unlike a lot of folklore creatures, the real danger isn't physical strength, it's judgment. These stories survive because they touch something almost everybody understands. The fear of trusting the wrong person, believing the wrong face, following the wrong voice. We've all felt some version of that. And that's why Dear Woman has lasted. Not just because people were afraid of what she was, but because they were afraid of what she represented. The idea that danger doesn't always look dangerous at first. Sometimes, it looks exactly like what you wanted to find. And I'll say this. That's a much more adult fear than most monsters. A monster is easy to recognize. Deception isn't. That's why Dear Woman takes number 2. Because of every legend we've talked about tonight, this one understands something deeply uncomfortable about human nature. The things that hurt us the most rarely look dangerous in the beginning. And if that bothers you, number 1 is even simpler. No mountain, no empty highway, no shadow standing on a distant ridge. This one starts in the place almost everybody believes they're safe. Home. Number 1, the death knock. And out of everything on this list, this is the story that stayed with me the longest. Not because it's bigger than the others, not because it's stranger. Actually, it's the opposite. What makes the death knock unsettling is just how normal it sounds. For generations, families throughout Appalachia passed down the same warning. Late at night, somebody hears a knock at the door. They get up, they walk over, they open it. Nobody's there. That's it. At first, it almost sounds too simple to be scary. Then the rest of the story comes. A few days later, word gets around that somebody has died. And suddenly, that little moment you almost forgot about doesn't feel so little anymore. That's the part that fascinates me. Not really the knock itself. It's what happens in your head afterward. How one completely ordinary sound becomes impossible to separate from what happened next. I've read folklore from all over the world, and plenty of traditions have warnings connected to death. Most of them give you something, a figure, a spirit, a sign, something you can actually point to. The death knock doesn't. It just leaves you there with uncertainty. And uncertainty can be a lot more powerful than a monster. Maybe that's why the story survived. Because it attaches itself to something nearly everybody understands. A quiet night, an unexpected sound, that brief moment when your mind starts asking questions before you've even reached the door. Who could that be? Why now? The legend never answers those questions. It just leaves them there. And maybe that's exactly why people kept telling the story. Not because they could prove it, because they couldn't completely dismiss it either. And for me, that's what puts the death knock above everything else on this list. You don't have to imagine some distant mountain. You don't need a dark forest. You don't need an abandoned building. You just have to imagine yourself at home, alone, late at night. That's enough. And I think that's why this story has lasted for so long. People forget details. They forget who first told them the story, but they remember the feeling. A quiet house, a knock at the door, then silence. That's why the death knock takes number 1. Because out of every legend we've covered tonight, this is the one that feels like it could happen before you go to sleep tonight. So now I want to hear from you. Which one disturbed you the most? And more importantly, if somebody knocked on your door tonight, would you answer it right away?